So today's title of the lesson is Bioethics. The date is Thursday, October 21st, and it is Unit 6, Day 3. Please make sure that you are writing down the title of the lesson, the date, and the fact that it is Unit 6, Day 3, so that you can promote strong organizational skills, which include effective and efficient note-taking. The objective today is to explain various applications of biotechnology by participating in the practice and discussion. Your essential question is to evaluate some of the ethical issues surrounding DNA. So again, we won't be taking too many notes today. All right. So bioethics, if we really just break that word down, we've got bio, meaning life, biology, ethics, meaning interested in morality or values. Bioethics is the study of ethical issues emerging from advances in biotechnology and medicine. So bioethics asks the question, now that we know we can do this, should we? So just because technology has developed to the point where we can do amazing things, it doesn't necessarily guarantee that we should be doing those things. Some of these advances have given us technology that could actually be more harmful to society than beneficial. So please make sure you write down the definition of bioethics. All right. So we want to think about some of the topics that come up as it relates to bioethics. One of these topics is euthanasia. Does anyone know what euthanasia is? Nope, no one knows what euthanasia is. Has anybody ever had a pet and the pet needed to be put down?
Yeah, I had a fish, but it didn't need to be put down. I just didn't feed it.
Okay, so you killed your fish, all right.
I mean, I didn't kill it. It was just like, yeah, basically.
You starved your fish, okay. Anybody, so no one's ever had a pet that they needed to take to the veterinarian to be put down. I guess that's a good thing. It could be a traumatizing thing for a kid to go through. But when we say that a pet is being put down, what we're talking about is that pet is being euthanized. It's being, essentially it's being killed, but in a peaceful and painless way. DJ, did you have something for us?
What if you accidentally run over your dog?
That's not going to be considered euthanization, because that would not be painless. So when we think about euthanization, the prefix EU means good. So we're talking about something that is going to be free of pain. And as it relates to human beings, the idea is that you're actually relieving that person of this chronic pain that they're experiencing. So let's watch this video, and you all hopefully will have a better idea of what exactly we mean.
A 17-year-old has has become the first minor to die by euthanasia in Belgium. It's the first application of legislation adopted by the country in 2014. It allows for the doctor-assisted death of minors of all ages if their condition is incurable. The patient is said to have been critically ill, but no other information has been given. Firstly, happily, there are not a lot of minors in a terminally ill condition, he says. Secondly, doctors use a recognized method in that they put the patient into an artificial coma in the end, what we call palliative sedation. Belgium legalized euthanasia in 2002. 2 years ago, it amended the rules to permit doctor-assisted death for minors of all ages, the first country in the world to do so. In the Netherlands, it's possible for children aged 12 and older. The fact that we made this possible means a lot of people who are faced with a terminal condition have found peace of mind because they know they can ask for euthanasia. They might decide not to ask the question, but the fact that they can makes a huge difference for a lot of people. Records from Belgium's National Euthanasia Control Committee show that between 2003 and 2013, 8,752 people ended their lives by euthanasia.
Okay. So, what are your thoughts on that? What might be some of the pros of euthanasia and what would be some of the cons? Don't everyone speak at once. I'll ask again. Based on the video we just watched that described euthanasia, talked a little bit about euthanasia in Belgium, which is a European country. What are some of the pros of euthanasia? Why should it be done? And what are some of the cons of euthanasia? Why should it not be done on human beings? Maybe is the issue that we don't fully understand what euthanasia is.
I think it's a good thing.
Why do you think so? I'm sorry, who said that?
Like McCarn said this, I think it's a good thing because you don't want just the kid to be sitting there for like years and stuff on life support. And that ain't doing them no good either.
Okay, great. Thank you, McCarran. So McCarran's opinion here is that we can alleviate some of the emotional stress on family members. Well, actually, you didn't say that. I'll just repeat what you said. You said we don't want a person to be on life support for a long time if we could just relieve them of being in that state. So what are maybe some other cons to doing, or I'm sorry, some other pros to doing euthanasia? I hinted at another pro, but McCarran gave a good one. We're thinking about the person who might be on life support and maybe is even unconscious. What might be some other reasons to do it? Jessica adds the perspective that it opens up the possibility for organ donation. That's an important perspective to have as well. What else? We now have two reasons why it might be a good thing. But why might it be something that we do not allow?
What we supposed to be doing?
I'm just asking questions. I'm trying to figure out what you all think of this euthanasia video that we just watched. I've heard from Jessica and I heard from Makairon. What about the 18 other people on the call? Okay. Bioethics also concerns itself with this concept of what we might call designer babies, babies whose genomes have been edited or specifically chosen to reflect desired traits, such as perfect vision and increased intelligence, a lower risk of Alzheimer's and stroke, increased athletic abilities, a decreased likelihood of developing inherited diseases. So because of the advances of biotechnology, we now have the ability to go in and edit people's genomes, not people's, but specific cells' genomes, which could then develop into babies that have these desired traits. So let's watch this video. And you all, I want you to, this time, to be sure that we have some opinions that get shared. Please think as we watch this video about whether or not you agree that this is a good thing, or if you think this is a bad thing, or if you think we should slow our roll and not continue to develop these technologies. So please be willing and ready to share out after we watch this video.
Have you ever dreamt of having awesome superhuman powers like the X-Men? With recent improvements in gene therapy, the reality of having designer babies is closer than ever. But this begs the question, if you are having a child, would you want to pick and choose their traits? Is this even ethical? And how far can the use of these technologies actually go? Remember, we post new content every single week, So subscribe to our channel and click that bell icon so you don't miss out. Now, back to the video. The phrase designer baby refers to one whose genetic makeup has been altered or chosen to provide the desired genome. There are currently 3 technologies that have been developed to enable this, all of which involve manipulating fertilized eggs before in vitro fertilization. The first one is called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. This is the simplest of the 3 methods and doesn't involve any gene editing. Instead, it involves choosing between viable eggs for the one that best satisfies what the parents want. For example, it can be used to screen for diseases or even to predetermine gender. The second one is talons, transcription activator-like effector nucleases. These are enzymes that can be designed to remove specific parts of the DNA strands. They then replace this section, thus allowing edits to be made. In theory, this technique can be used to target any section of DNA and has been used to design plants, fuels, and even pets to certain specifications. The third one is Crispr, which stands for Clustered Regularly Interspaced Short Palindromic Repeats, and it's a process that was discovered in the DNA sequence of certain bacteria. Their DNA contains snippets of the DNA of viruses that have previously attacked them to allow them to recognize any threat in the future. The method by which this new DNA becomes a part of their own has been replicated to allow the modification of other DNA strands. This again, in theory, allows edits to be made to any part of the genome. So can these methods be used on humans? Of these 3, only the use of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis is already being used for human pregnancies, with the first known case being as early as 1988. There remains a long way to go before the other 2 methods are deemed safe enough for human use. And as far as we know, there have not yet been any uses on a human embryo. Despite only one of these methods being currently used, there are a number of options that are available to parents. Eggs can be screened for gender, appearance, intelligence, disease, and personality. Of these, the most common type of screening is for diseases, particularly for couples who are at high risk of passing them on to their offspring. Screening for other aspects remain highly controversial and in most countries illegal. Crucially, this technique doesn't allow the editing of the genome, but the ability to choose between already viable eggs and decide which one to proceed with during pregnancy. Another emerging technology is that of 3-person babies. This is a procedure that means a baby has 3 genetic parents, with the third person providing the mitochondrial DNA. This can prevent the development of issues such as muscular dystrophy and certain heart and liver conditions. So, what are the future possibilities for designer babies? As scientists perfect techniques of genetic manipulation, especially those of talons and CRISPR, the possibilities that become unlocked are theoretically endless. It would become possible to design every part of the genome, whether it's eye color, hair color, disease resistance, or far more advanced traits. What if you could increase brain function, muscle mass, or eyesight? Lifespans could be lengthened, or perhaps new human abilities could be developed. So much so that creating real-life X-Men could come within the realm of possibility. But we have to wonder, how will this change society? While regulations prohibit these types of changes, the technology will become so prevalent that more complex designer babies are sure to happen at some point. There are clear benefits to this. It would reduce genetic and inherited diseases or conditions. The child would have a better chance to succeed in life. Lifespans would increase, and children could be given genes that their parents don't possess. But a number of negatives are associated with this as well. There would be an increased number of terminated embryos, which many believe already constitute as living beings. There could be damage to the overall gene pool. Children would have no choice on how their genes were altered, and there would be a loss of individuality, as everyone became more like a generic ideal. Furthermore, some genes could have multiple purposes, and if changed, could have wildly unpredictable consequences, and it could lead to the development of new diseases and vulnerabilities. The main ethical issues about gene modification is the question of who determines which traits are good or bad. We risk eliminating unique and different people from society, and that is a problem. The process of designing a baby would also be incredibly expensive, at least in the beginning. This means that it would be something only accessible to the rich and lead to further inequalities in society. The ability to create designer babies is far closer than we might think, and in some cases is already taking place. While it seems like there are many benefits to procedures like this, our desire to control every aspect of nature could potentially lead to our downfall. Thanks for watching!
Sorry about that, I was on mute. Before you all share out with your opinions as it relates to this video about designer babies, I do want you all to consider one thing, and that's the historical addition to the conversation. So in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and even before that in some societies, there was this idea of eugenics that was being really popularized by racists and white supremacists. And this idea stated that people of European descent, European ancestry, in some places it was called Aryan ancestry, had the superior genes. They had a superior genetic makeup. And so everyone else was seen as biologically inferior, biologically less human, biologically less intelligent, biologically less civilized. And so these people, who obviously were extremely racist, argued that white people and people of quote unquote pure European ancestry should be the only people who should be allowed to reproduce. What this meant was that they took actual steps to prevent other people from having children. They performed surgical experiments without people's consent. And they also told people of European ancestry to have more children so that one day they would eventually weed out everybody else who had the inferior genes. So this phenomenon of eugenics was eventually came to be known as a pseudoscience, a fake science, and it became highly discredited because it was so racist, and it eventually led to things like, Nazi Germany and the Holocaust and the continuation of white supremacy in the Jim Crow South, things like that. So eugenics today is very highly frowned upon. It's not considered a real science. We now know that there is no biological basis for race, but this concept of designer babies conjures up thoughts of this eugenics phenomenon because it allows us to think about what it might mean if people could pick and choose what they wanted their children to not only look like, but also what they wanted them to behave like. You could literally impact a child's personality if you could have choice over what genes are expressed and how they are expressed. And this is the concept of selective breeding. So do you all think that we should be able to genetically modify our future offspring? Because the video does a good job of outlining some pros and some cons. So what do you all think? Should this be allowed?
Yes.
Why, Kyrie?
I just feel like that it would be right.
Why? Why would it be right?
Oh, no. I don't think that's right. My bad.
I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just asking for you to
Yeah,
explain
no. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's right.
Why not? What's your? I want you to explain your opinion.
Because like you messing with somebody's child, or yeah.
But it's your own child. What if it's your choice?
But you should like your child how it is. You shouldn't be trying to change it.
Okay. So I get that perspective. You should just accept your child how they are.
Yeah.
Does anybody have a similar opinion or a differing opinion? Can you say more about that, Ayana? Okay. So Ayana is concerned about the baby's health in the long run. They did say that this could potentially create new diseases, new conditions that we don't yet know about. And Jessica says she's in doubt. It might be good, but it could also bring new complications, which is similar to what Ayana said. Are there any other thoughts about this? So we're starting to get the ball rolling. I want you guys to kind of warm up. Ayana said the creation of a whole new human, like we should not mess with that. Okay. And some people come at it from a religious or a spiritual perspective that human beings should not play the role of God. You know, God, it's God's decision to make us who we are, not for humans to decide. So that is an interesting perspective and one that should be respected. What are the benefits? The narrator did mention several benefits in the video. Was anybody able to catch any of the benefits that were mentioned in the video? Exactly, Jessica. So they did mention that you could potentially avoid some of the genetic diseases that might otherwise be present. And that is certainly a positive benefit. In fact, this is something that has already happened for the last 35 years or so in the United States, where people via in vitro. What'd you say, Anthony?
Those the eugenics, like, as I say, right? Eugenics.
Yes.
All right, so that has a lot of the stuff to do with the selective breeding. Like most of the stuff to do with it, or no?
Well, eugenics is a form of selective breeding, and specifically it is a racist form of selective breeding. But what I was getting ready to say is that in the last 35 years or so, human beings have had the ability to choose. Women have had the opportunity to choose which eggs that they would like to fertilize in what is called in vitro fertilization. In vitro fertilization involves taking a woman's egg and fertilizing it outside of her body, so in a laboratory environment, and then placing that fertilized egg, which would then be called a zygote, back into a woman to then start to develop into a human being. So women can choose which egg they want to fertilize in hopes that they will choose eggs that are less likely to have genetic disorders at birth. So that is a form of selective breeding as well that I don't think anyone would consider racist. They would probably consider that humane, so that the baby is not born with any potential genetic defect. But that's also controversial still. Some people believe that in vitro fertilization is also not a good thing, and that, again, you're messing with what is biologically natural. So bioethics involves itself with both of those conversations. Let's think about something else.
cloning of monkey and use monkeys as experimental animals is really for the human health, for the curing of human disease. There are many other animal models you can use. You can use mice, and that was widely used, but there has been difficulty in using that as an animal model for human disease because mice are very far away from humans.
Okay, before we move on, does anyone have any thoughts about the cloning video?
No, sir.
Thank you, Anthony. And to answer your question in the chat, Jessica, you can. As I was saying, some women have chosen which eggs they would like to be fertilized, which means that they can do specific analyses of their eggs before they're fertilized to find out what the likelihood of those eggs developing into babies with genetic diseases would be. So let's say that a woman has 10 eggs. She only wants one child, so she only needs one of them to be fertilized. Scientists can actually analyze each of those 10 eggs to figure out what the likelihood of them developing into a baby with genetic diseases might be. So women who, let's say, have the sickle cell trait, they might want to know before they actually have children what the likelihood of their child developing sickle cell anemia would be. And if they find that specific eggs are less likely to develop into babies with sickle cell anemia, then they might choose to fertilize those eggs. And this is all through the process of an in vitro fertilization. In a natural, well, I say natural, but in an unassisted fertilization process, which is the result of sex, just normal sex, there wouldn't be, obviously, you wouldn't know. You would have no way of knowing what the likelihood of your baby developing into a boy or a girl or any genetic disorder. You have no way of knowing that. So you would require, in many cases, the assistance of a scientist doing some type of analysis. But it's possible to figure that out. Any other thoughts on the cloning video? Okay, that one I didn't feel was very interesting, but certainly it's still controversial. So let's think about this one too. Let's think about how DNA privacy should be something that we might be worried about, and think about how it could potentially be an issue of bioethics.
DNA tests like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA are becoming more and more popular. DNA tests like 23andMe and Ancestry DNA are becoming more and more popular. This raises privacy concerns, and not just for those taking the tests. Soon, the concept of privacy as we know it will come to an end. Back in April, police arrested a man as the Golden State Killer, an infamous alleged serial killer who murdered 13 people back in the 1970s and 80s. After all this time, police eventually found the suspect when they uploaded DNA from a crime scene to a genealogy website database, where they found a number of matches, his third and fourth cousins. At first, police didn't release a lot of these details. There was a lot of speculation about how they did find their man. But when I started calling up genealogists, they could guess right away. This is exactly how they have been finding biological parents for adoptees and sperm donor-conceived kids for years. Since then, the dam has broken. DNA is being used to solve cold cases and even active investigations. In the last 5 months alone, this technique has contributed to 15 arrests. You might wonder, Were these alleged criminals just unlucky? Did they randomly happen to have family members who took a DNA test? The answer is maybe more disconcerting. A study found that most Americans of European descent can already be found through a relative's DNA, just like the Golden State Killer. The relative can be as distant as a third cousin. Third cousins only share a small amount of DNA, but it's enough to build family trees if you use data from the census, obituaries, and other public records. Investigators go through people in the family tree one by one until they get to their suspect. Police do this with a public database called GEDmatch, where anyone can upload results from 23andMe or Ancestry DNA. Even if you never take a DNA test or commit a crime, this can affect you. Criminal cases are one thing, but here's another scenario. A man donated sperm anonymously 30 years ago. If his second cousin once removed takes a DNA test, his children will be able to find him. Relatives you've never met can take DNA tests that affect you, and the actions you take can affect relatives that you don't even know. If you think you've taken precautions to protect your privacy online, you could still find yourself out of luck. As DNA tests get more and more popular, databases like GEDmatch get bigger and bigger. Soon, it won't be hard to imagine a world where anyone can be found, for whatever reason, through a relative's DNA. The idea of your DNA being private no longer exists.
So what do we think about that? Is that fair? That our DNA, even if we haven't publicly exposed it, our DNA could still be used without our knowledge because of our relatives' DNA being used. Do we think that that's fair? So Jessica is thinking from the perspective of helping people who've been wrongfully convicted. And I think that's a good point too. We talked a little bit yesterday about how DNA, and the day before that actually, how DNA can be used to exonerate people who've been wrongfully convicted. That's a great point. Okay, no other questions or points to be made about that, so I will move on. What do we think about this? Crossbreeding animals purely for human benefit. So just to, have dogs, breeds of dogs that we like, or a mix between a lion and a tiger just because we think it's cool. What do we think about that? Okay, what about these changes to agriculture? What do we think about these? We're looking at the increased amount of growth hormones in chickens between 1957 and 2005. The size of the average chicken has ballooned as they've been fed more and more growth hormones.
Yes.
We think that's a good thing.
Yes, so we can have more food.
Okay.
Now we can have more food without killing too many animals.
Okay, so that's definitely a real benefit. Can anybody think of some detriments or some cons? Why would that not be a good thing?
Maybe it could kill the animal.
Okay, so certainly, in some cases, the chickens actually get so big that their legs are not strong enough to hold them up. So their legs literally break under their weight, and they can't move around. So that's not good for the animal. Can anyone think of any other reasons why that might not be a good thing? Exactly, Jessica. So one of the worst parts is that it's not just the chickens who are affected. Once you eat the chicken, you're also eating the hormones that the chicken ate, which have of course become a part of the chicken's body. So what we're seeing is that the average birth weight of American babies and the average weight of American toddlers and pre-adolescent children is increasing because there are more growth hormones in the food that they are eating. And this can lead to a higher likelihood of adolescent obesity, and it can also lead to a higher likelihood of adult obesity. So certainly that's not a good thing. We also want to think about other aspects of agriculture. So we might be able to, we are able to create crops that are pest resistant, meaning that we change the chemical makeup of the crops in a way that's not noticeable to us when we eat them, but when insects try to eat them, their plants are either poisonous to the insects or they just simply don't taste good anymore. So this increases the amount of crops that can be grown, which also increases the amount of crops that we can use to feed people. But at the same time, the pesticides that we use can have a negative effect on our health. They're not good for us. They might, in fact, be cancer causing. They might be carcinogens. So again, good and bad. It's good because we get more food from it. It's bad because it can end up being harmful to us. And even people who don't, the thing about it, and one thing we have to talk about, we'll talk more about it later in the course, there's a concept of environmental racism. Maybe you all talked about it last year in your Earth and Environmental Science course, but environmental racism is the fact that in many cases, the changes that we're seeing in our climate and the changes that we're seeing in our environment will disproportionately affect people of color, and specifically poor Black people, because those poor Black people are more likely to live in areas where they might be exposed to these cancer-causing agents like pesticides, or they might live near a factory, or they might live near a body of water that is a source of chemical runoff, and they might be drinking some of these pesticides. A classic example of this, and one that received a lot of attention for all the wrong reasons, is Flint, Michigan. Does anybody know what happened in Flint? This would have been maybe a few years ago, so you all were probably in seventh or eighth grade. Does anyone know what happened in Flint? And what is really still happening in Flint? Okay, so Flint, Michigan has had something that we refer to as a water crisis. So Flint, Michigan is, of course, only about an hour outside of Detroit, which over the course of the last 200 years or so has been one of the most prosperous cities in our country. Then when the auto industry, chose to leave Detroit and went for the most part to other countries, Detroit suffered and became a much less prosperous and much more impoverished city. And this also affected the surrounding areas like Flint, Michigan. Because of this, there was less attention paid to some of the regulations about what companies could do. And so some companies used the water in Flint, like the rivers, to basically dump all their chemicals. This, of course, contaminated the water supply that people were supposed to be using to drink, to shower, to brush their teeth, cook. And even for the last 3 or 4 years, even to this day, the water supply in Flint is very, very contaminated with a number of dangerous chemicals. And there are videos that show people in Flint running their water out of their shower and it's coming out totally brown. So because of this, they use bottled water essentially to do everything, to brush their teeth and to cook and to shower, take baths. So this is a clear example of environmental racism. But when we think about farms, oftentimes the pesticides that the farms use, they get absorbed by the soil and then they eventually make their way down all the way into these sources of underground water. That underground water then flows into the rivers. And so now you've got pesticides and chemicals in the river, making the water no longer potable, no longer healthy to drink. So this is a huge problem. All right, let's play this quick Kahoot. All right, so you're going to go to www.kahoot.it and enter the game pin 6186097. I'm going to send it to the chat. Thank you, Nevaeh, for being the first. Thank you, Kyrie. Thank you, Fanique. Okay, I'm going to wait about 30 more seconds in hopes that several more people will come into the game. We've got 22 people on the call, which means 9 more people can join. Okay. Cloning copies DNA. The DNA of animals is found in which organelle? Excellent. DNA is always going to be found in the nucleus of an animal cell. Good job. A technique for sorting DNA based on the size and charge of its fragments. We talked about this on Tuesday. Excellent. This process is called gel electrophoresis. Gel electrophoresis. It's a difficult name to say, but if we look at the picture that they gave us, here's the gel. This is your source of an electrical current to pull the DNA through the gel from the negative to the positive. Good job, Alyssa and Nick and Nevaeh. A blank will cut DNA at certain nucleotide sequences. Okay, so these are called the restriction enzymes. They are like the scissors that cut the DNA, but they only do it in specific places. Restriction enzymes. Good job, Nick. Okay, good. So we should know that photosynthesis takes place in the chloroplast of plant cells. Good job. Okay, Alyssa, retaking the lead. Nick, you didn't get that one right. Okay, which application of biotechnology replaces a disease-causing gene with a normal gene? Replaces a disease-causing gene with a normal gene. Excellent, gene therapy. Good job, good job, good job. DeMarco's on the rise. Which type of organism contains DNA from a foreign organism? Good, a transgenic organism. We discussed those yesterday. Which of the following is true regarding prokaryotes compared to eukaryotes? Good.
I'm on the rise up.
What is the first step in making a transgenic organism? So this is all from the notes yesterday. So if you took good notes, you should be good to go here. Okay, great. Which suspect left the blood stain? Which suspect left the blood stain? Okay, so let's look at this picture again. So the blood stain is on the left. We want to know which of these four individuals shares the most DNA fragments with this blood stain. So Bob shares a few of them, but some of them are not in the exact same place. Sue shares fairly few, but John has the exact same pattern of DNA fragments. So the blood stain more than likely came from John. Gel electrophoresis can be used for solving crimes and for paternity testing. True or false? Create the complementary DNA strand for ACT, TAG, ACA. We're looking for the complementary DNA strand. Good. So A is complementary to T. C is complementary to G. T is complementary to A. So ACT becomes TGA. TAG becomes ATC. ACA becomes TGT. Good job. Rebuilding tissue protection and speeding up reactions is the job of which organic compound? Proteins. Good. So remember, proteins have a wide variety of functions, including enzymes, hormones, insulin, antibodies. So we've got to keep in mind that they do each of these things, unlike the others, which have more focused functions. Alyssa's pulling away with it. Let's see if Nevaeh can get back into the top three. Kyrie and Nick, see if you can hold your spots. A freshwater plant is placed into a saltwater pond. What do you expect to happen? Good. So if we have a saltwater pond, that means that water is going to leave the plant because there's less water on the outside, right? The cell itself, the plant, has a high concentration of water. The salt water has a lower concentration of water. So that means that water is going to want to flow from the high concentration to the low concentration. And that means water leaves the cell, causing the cell to shrink. Good job, Nick and Alyssa. Somebody else got it right too. Two more questions. Which specialized tissue found in plants is responsible for transporting water to the leaves? We haven't really talked about this much. I will tell you the answer is xylem. Okay, I think yeah, good job. Xylem. So xylem moves from the roots to the leaves. Last question. During which phase of the cell cycle does DNA replication happen? Definitely hope you all know this one. Good job. Good job, Alyssa. 14 out of 15 questions right. And good job to you too, Nick and Kyrie. All right. So at this point, we only have 3 minutes left in the class, and I do want you all to knock out the warm-up, but I'm not going to, take your time doing that. So you can do it on your own time, but please do make sure that you do it. Remember the warm-ups and exit tickets. Did I say warm-up? Please do the exit ticket.